Most people look at a map and only see lines, but those lines are the shape of the ground. Ridges, spurs, re-entrants. Natural features hidden in plain sight. And once you understand what they are, you stop seeing contour lines and start seeing mountains. Hi guys, welcome back to Barkike Field Division. Today we're going to be looking at relief features and identifying relief features on your map. First of all, it's important to understand that a map is a 2D representation of a 3D world. Once we start to understand contour lines, we then start to see the map in 3D. Rather than looking at a flat piece of paper, we're seeing the relief features, the heights, basically looking at the map in a 3D vision. Each contour line represents a different height. They follow the shapes of the ground, the terrain features. It's important to understand because if you're hiking, you need to know if you're going to be climbing up an absolute beast, how high it's going to be. That'll affect your time, your pacing, your distance. So these things are good to know. So let's take a look at contours. So, contour lines will usually appear on your map as brown lines. You'll often see them grouped tightly together around steep terrain or more widely spread around flatter ground. You can identify contour lines by either using the key on the map or simply by looking for the brown lines on the map. You'll also notice numbers marked along some of the contour lines. These numbers indicate height and also can help you understand the elevation change between the contours. Usually it's around 10 meters, but of course that depends on the scale of the map you're using. So the closer they are together, the steeper the terrain, and the more widely spread they are, the more forgiving, gentle slope it is. On looking at this section of the map, we can quite clearly identify the contours. They're the brown squiggly lines running all over the shot. We can also identify the heights. We can see there it's labelled 530, 540, 550 on the left hand side, and on the right hand side 250, 300, 350. So that gives us an indicator that each line is 10 meters apart. So we have our heights and we have our elevation gain. We can see in the top left that the contours are grouped tightly together. This is a feature, okay? This is steep terrain. We can also see where it says 530 on the center bottom left that they're more spread apart, that we know that terrain is a lot less steep. These are key indicators of a relief feature. So like I said before, a map really just is a 2D representation of a 3D world. Contour lines allow us to visualize the shape of that terrain. Every contour line represents a different height on the ground, and when those heights are flattened onto a map, this is what creates contour lines. Once you understand that, you stop looking at maps as that flat piece of paper and you start seeing the terrain itself. Now, once you understand contour lines and how to identify contour lines, we can start using the contour lines to identify relief features. And what relief features help us in is navigation. We can look at the shape of a mountain, the height of a mountain, identify that mountain and use that to determine our position. So let's take a look at some of the relief features that will show up on a map. Okay, so now we understand how to identify contour lines. We can start using the contour lines to identify actual terrain. And once you understand these shapes that I'm about to go through with you, you can begin visualizing terrain before you even step out there. So you know what's ahead of you, you know what you got to battle across, or you know if you need to reroute. Okay, so not only do they tell us how high or how steep a feature is, they also give us a lot more information. For example, they also tell us how the slope changes. So the next thing we're going to cover is a convex slope and a concave slope, and how to tell the difference on a map. So here we have a convex slope, gentle at the top and steeper at the bottom. And we know this by looking at the contour lines. We can see they're closely together, which means it's steep, gradually fading out further and further apart to an opening top. Now let's compare that to a concave slope and see the difference. As you can see, the concave slope is the opposite of the convex. Wider spacings between the contours at the bottom, and then gradually going closer and closer together, making it more steep at the top. So now, seeing the differences between the two, why is this important? It's important because you need to know what kind of terrain you're facing and what you're going up against. If you were to just walk on blindly, you'd be on a convex slope, you'd be hitting steepness straight away, thinking, what the hell am I doing? I need to turn around, this is too steep for me. But if you saw that on the map straight away, you knew what was coming, you knew how the ground worked, and you'd make an alternative route, or carry on if you're that way inclined. And with a concave, you're thinking, okay, this is quite easy, it's a mellow climb, and then all of a sudden, bang, you're hit with sheerness. But you can read all of this on the map. Let's look at a valley now. Now, we should all know what a valley looks like from a human perspective, but let's look at it on a map and how to identify it. On a topographic map, valleys are usually identified by contour lines forming a V shape. The important thing to remember is the point of the V points uphill. Most valleys will also contain some form of watercourse, such as a river or a stream. Valleys usually have steep terrain on either side, with lower ground running through the middle, and because of this, they can become excellent navigational handrails once we've learned how to identify them clearly on a map. As we can see on this map, the main valley sits over on the right hand side, with the contour lines forming V shapes pointing uphill. But we can also see smaller, tighter and more compact V shapes on the left hand side. These are re-entrants, smaller cuts in the terrain feeding down into the main valley system below. Features like these become extremely important in navigation, especially in poor visibility. So, we've just identified two major terrain features there. Yeah? The valley and the re-entrant. And once you learn how to interpret these on a map, it can give you a serious navigational advantage. You're no longer guessing what the terrain is doing, you're understanding it before you even arrive. Let's move on to our next relief feature, which will be the saddle. A saddle can be easily recognised on a map. A saddle is a low ground between two high points, also called a col or a pass. Saddles provide lower crossing points through mountain terrain. They often become natural travel routes. You'll also notice that the wind conditions can become far more severe around saddles as air gets funneled through the lower ground. When looking at the contours, notice how the ground rises on either side but drops slightly in the middle. So unlike the valley, the saddle is not the lowest point running through a mountain range. It's the lowest point between two areas of high ground. These are extremely important to know because we can identify a navigational route, and we can also use the relief feature to pinpoint our location as well. So let's move on to our next relief feature, which is the ridge. So we covered valleys and re-entrants before, but unlike a valley or a re-entrant, where the contour V shapes point uphill, a ridge is usually identified by the V shape pointing downhill. This indicates that the terrain is dropping away on both sides, forming an area of extended higher ground. Instead of terrain cutting into the mountain like a valley, the ridge projects away from the surrounding lower ground. The higher and more exposed the ridge becomes, the more vulnerable it is to strong winds, lightning, and sudden weather changes. In poor visibility, being able to correctly identify a ridge from the map can make navigation far simpler, especially when compared against the terrain around you. So instead of just seeing lines on a paper, start looking at how the mountain itself is shaped, because that's what the map is showing you. As we look more closely at this map, we notice the ridge. But one thing that coincides with the ridge is the spur. And the spur is basically recognised by the contours becoming less aggressive, less tightly V-shaped, more rounded and spread, indicating a more manageable descent line. The highlighted section here forms a spur, projecting away from the main ridgeline. Notice how the contours become less aggressive and more rounded, indicating a more gradual line of descent compared to the steeper terrain surrounding it. Features like this can often provide more manageable movement through mountainous terrain, which is why understanding spurs can become extremely useful in navigation. So that's our relief features covered, and hopefully we have a better understanding now. What we've covered there is convex and concave slopes, valleys, re-entrants, saddles, ridges, and finally spurs. And now we're hopefully beginning to see that contour lines aren't just brown squiggles on a map. They're more than just random markings. They show us the sharpness of the mountain, the steepness of the terrain, potential navigation routes, and how the landscape itself flows around us. Once you begin to understand these terrain features, you start building a genuine navigational advantage. We're going to put these into practice in our next lesson. We're going to do navigating using terrain features, and we'll probably do that on the ground. So I hope you guys have enjoyed it. I hope it's helped. And thanks for watching. See you in the next one.